All right, in today's video, I'm going to be commenting on a video. It's with the Four Horsemen: Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. And I'm just going to share my thoughts as we go. It's kind of the way things work, is because it's my YouTube channel. I can watch a video and talk about it. And so this will be interesting because I haven't watched this video yet. It's about an hour long, so I don't know how long this particular video will be. Maybe I'll split it up into two. It just depends how I feel. So let us begin. If you like this kind of thing, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Feel free to share your thoughts, your comments. I always like to do this every once in a while. I'll go watch a video where somebody will believe in the exact opposite of what I believe, just to hear their thoughts and see what they have to say. All right, here we go.
One of the things we've all met is the accusation that we are strident or arrogant or vitriolic or shrill. What do we think about that?
Yeah, well, I'm amused by it because I went out of my way in my book to address reasonable religious people, and I test flew the draft with groups of students who were deeply religious. And indeed, the first draft incurred some real anguish. And so I made adjustments and made adjustments. And it didn't do any good in the end because I still got hammered.
Question. I see a Perrier bottle here, and I see two cocktails. I'm not sure what those are. I'm assuming these might be Scotch. Maybe Scotch. I don't see a bottle anywhere. I'm just curious if anyone knows when they're watching this video as to what kind of a drink this is. I'd be kind of curious. Looks like some kind of lime. Not sure. Is that like a snail or something in the drink? What is that? Is this tequila? Could be tequila. Anyways, just more of a observation.
For being rude and aggressive, and I came to realize that it's a no-win situation. It's a mug's game. The religions have contrived to make it impossible to disagree with them critically without being rude.
Without being rude.
They sort of play the hurt feelings card at every opportunity, and you're faced with the choice of, well, am I going to be rude, or am I going to articulate this criticism? Yeah. I mean, am I going to articulate it, or am I just going to button my lip?
Right. Well, that's what it is to trespass a taboo. I think we're all encountering the fact that religion is held off the table of rational criticism in some kind of formal way, even by, we're discovering, our fellow secularists and our fellow atheists. Just leave people to their own superstition, even if it's abject and causing harm. I don't look too closely at it.
Now that was, of course, the point of the title of my book, is there is this spell and we got to break it.
But if the charge of offensiveness in general is to be allowed in public discourse, then without self-pity, I think we should say that we too can be offended and insulted. I mean, I'm not just in disagreement when someone like Tariq Ramadan, accepted now at the high tables of Oxford University as a spokesman, says the most he'll demand when it comes to the stoning of women is a moratorium on it. I find that profoundly much more than annoying.
Right, yeah.
Insulting, not only insulting, but actually threatening.
But you're not offended. This is, you don't take any, I don't see you taking things personally. You're alarmed by the liabilities of certain ways of thinking, as in Ramadan's case.
But he would say, or people like him would say, that if I doubt the historicity of the Prophet Muhammad, I've injured them in their deepest feelings.
Right.
Well, I am, in fact, I think all people ought to be offended, at least in their deepest integrity, by, say, the religious proposition that without a supernatural celestial dictatorship, we wouldn't know right from wrong. that we only
Yeah.
live by.
But are you
we only
really
live by
offended by
permission.
that? Doesn't it just seem wrong
No,
to you?
I say only, Sam, that if the offensiveness charge is to be allowed in general and arbitrated by the media, then I think we're entitled to claim that much without being self-pitying or representing ourselves as an oppressed.
I'm just going to interject here. One thing I find interesting, and I would have to agree with Christopher Hitchens, is as a Christian, obviously I'm viewing this video from my own lens, if you will, my own bias. I honestly believe that in order for you to be able to truly listen to someone, doesn't matter if they're an atheist, if they're Muslim, if they're a Mormon, whoever it is, I think you have to be able to minimize the offensiveness. Meaning, don't take offense as to what someone is saying to you. And so my goal in life, in my daily walk, is to not be offended by people. Because if I'm being offended by someone, it means either I'm misunderstanding what they're trying to communicate to me, or maybe there's something there, maybe there's a truth that I thought I understood that I no longer understand. And I feel like that maybe that person is superior in intellect to me, whatever it is, because they have an understanding on this level and I have only an understanding on that level. So I think if you could try and figure out a way to minimize the offense, you can listen to what people are saying, like these four gentlemen. And I think that opens the door to better communication. You can understand both people's perspective. And I think that's what Sam Harris is trying to interject, is saying, like, you don't really take offense seriously. Like, you're not seriously offended by some of these people. And I think Christopher Hitchens is saying that he has a right to be offended. If people come at him being offended, he may feel that what they're saying is offending him. And what I'm saying is, if you can eliminate the offense, one, by looking at people and going, you guys are just all idiots, like looking at Christians and going, you're all idiots, you're all religious, whatever it is, you're not intellectual, like you're not up here, so I can't even listen to you. Well, you're wearing an offense and you're not going to be able to communicate back and forth. All you're doing is you're just waiting to interject what you want to say. You're waiting for them to finish. And in the Christian circle, we're guilty of that as well, as always thinking, oh, well, does this line up with what the Bible says? And you don't even hear what the person is saying. And then I think the same thing can happen from a perspective of someone out. Maybe they were a Christian in one state, or a Jew. Maybe they gave up Judaism, whatever it is. They're no longer a Muslim, whatever. They've had problems. So now they approach other people with that set of lenses. And then it's hard to communicate. It's hard to listen. So right now, because I haven't watched this video, and with my own personal walk, I'm trying not to be offended daily. And I'm also trying not to offend people. This is why you're not going to hear me swear on this YouTube channel. It's not that I don't swear. There's sometimes, like, if I smash my toe or something, there's going to be a cuss word coming out. But what I'm trying to do is minimize that so that I'm not offending anybody on my YouTube channel that maybe is a Christian. They go to church, and why should I cuss on here? Like, for myself personally. So that's kind of how I approach things. Same thing with drinking. If I like to have a cooler when I'm in Mexico or something like that, I'm totally comfortable with that. But if there's someone else that is either they're coming out of that where they're like, man, I can't even drink one bottle. If I have one drink, I drink all day long. I'm not gonna drink in front of them, period. I'm not. I'll just have a pop, or I'll have a coffee, or I'll have a water, or whatever. Why? It's because I don't want to offend their conscience. Not my conscience. My conscience is crystal clear. It's clean. But there are some people that are maybe looking at other people going, if you dress a certain way, if you look a certain way, if you drink a certain thing, if you touch a certain thing, if you do this on a holiday, or if you don't do this on a certain religious holiday, whatever it is, they get offended. And eventually it'll get to a point where you can't not offend someone. There's somebody on this planet that's going to be offended just by you waking up and breathing. They're offended at it. So I try to minimize that. That's a long way to say that. I just try and minimize it so that I can hear what other people are saying, even if they're people in my own church. Because everybody has their own point of view on stuff. It could be something as simple as me sharing the idea that I read the Bible every single month, and some people are like, well, that's silly. Why would you do that? Why would you go through the whole Bible every single month? Like, you should just focus on one verse for the whole month and do that. And I'm like, okay, obviously you're gonna offend somebody on this planet. So okay, we'll continue. Let these guys speak here, and I'm curious to hear how they deal with offense, if they talk about it, or if they just continue on.
Minority, which I think is an opposite danger, I would admit. I'd like to add also that I agree with Daniel that there's no way in which the charge against us can be completely avoided, because what we say does offend the very core of any serious religious person at any rate. If we deny the divinity of Jesus, for example, many people will be terrifically shocked and possibly hurt. It's just too bad.
I'm fascinated by the contrast between the amount of...
Obviously, I'm a Christian. I am not offended when somebody says they don't believe in the deity of Jesus Christ. I deal with this daily on my YouTube channel. People making comments and stuff saying they don't believe. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but why would I get mad at you? Like, if I saw you out in the street somewhere and you had a flat tire or something, I would ask you, and do you need a hand to get your flat tire fixed so that you can get to where you're going? Even if you're getting to maybe you have a meeting in a building where you're going to be slamming Jesus Christ for the next 2, 3, 4 hours, I'm going to help you get there. I'm going to give you a ride. And if you're hungry, I'm going to take you to a place to eat, get you something to drink, get you fed, make sure that tire's changed. I'll help you out in whatever way I need. It could be anyone else on the planet. It could be like just anyone. So I think we have to kind of separate ourselves from that kind of stuff, that you always treat humanity fairly. It's not so much what they say. Again, somebody saying that they don't believe in the divinity of Jesus does not offend me. Like, I'm not like, oh man, I'm going to lie awake tonight thinking about this. I'm not. So it would be interesting to be sitting at this table and listening to these guys talk. And I think it'd be quite fascinating just to hear their perspective in person. But anyways, I'll continue on.
Of offense that's taken by religion, and the amount of offense that people take against really anything else, like your artistic taste, your taste in music, your taste in art, your politics. You can be not exactly as rude as you like, but you can be far, far more rude about such things. And I'd quite like to try to quantify that, to actually do research about it, actually test people with statements about their favorite football team or their favorite piece of music or something, and see how far you can go before they take offense, compared to, is there anything else apart from, say, how ugly your face is that gives such...
Or your husband's or wife's or girlfriend's or partner's face.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I regularly debate with the terrible man called John Donoghue of the Catholic Defence League, and he actually is righteously upset by certain trends in modern art,
Right.
which tend to draw attention to themselves by blasphemy.
Well,
For
the
example,
piss
Serrano's
Christ, yeah.
Serrano's
Yes,
Piss Christ, or the
yes.
elephant dying on the Virgin, and so. And indeed, I think it's quite important that we share with Sophocles and other pre-monotheists a revulsion to desecration or to profanity. That we don't want to see churches desecrated or
No, indeed not.
religious icons trashed and so forth. That
Yes.
we share an admiration for at least some of the aesthetic achievements of religion.
Right. I think this whole notion of I think our criticism is actually more barbed than that, in the sense that we are offending people, but we're also telling them that they're wrong to be offended. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
physicists aren't offended when their view of physics is disproved or challenged. I mean, this is just not the way.
I'm finding myself agreeing with Sam Harris now that, yes, I agree that if let's just say if you're a scientist and you come up with a hypothesis, what could be something so simple? Distance. Let's just say this town it's 1,000 miles away, and somebody says, actually, no, I drove there and it's only 100 miles. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm wrong. I exaggerated on that claim. Mental note to myself, write that down. It's only 100 miles to this place. It's not 1,000. I think that's great. It's like, oh man, yeah, I was proven wrong. It's actually closer or further than I thought. So I agree with Sam Harris that if you are having a conversation and somebody's offended because you're right and they're wrong, that's kind of a different thing, because that happens a lot, and it's hard not to get offended at being wrong. It's just hard. It's a human trait, I think, that we especially as men, we don't want to be wrong on anything under the sun. So I think, again, if you could minimize and understand, if somebody points out to you and says, look, here's A plus B equals C. Therefore, if your formula is 1 plus 2 equals D or 4 or 0 or something else, and it's not right, but here's what the formula is, I think you have to revisit that and look at it and go, okay, I've had this formula wrong. This formula seems to be better. So I agree with Sam Harris.
Rational minds operate when they're really trying to get at what's true in the world. And religions purport to be representing reality, and yet there's this peevish and tribal and ultimately dangerous reflexive response to having these ideas challenged. I think we're pointing to the total liability of that.
Well, and two, there's no polite way to say to somebody,
you've wasted your life.
Do you realize you've wasted your life? Do you realize that you've just devoted all your efforts and all your goods to a glorification of something which is just a myth? Or have you ever considered even if you say, have you even considered the possibility that maybe you've wasted your life on this? There's no inoffensive way of saying that, but we do have to say it because.
Which is interesting. I'm not sure which gentleman this is. Daniel Dennett. Not sure which guy this is. Maybe it'll come up. But when they say something like you wasted your life on something like this, maybe he's talking about religion. Like if somebody's a Christian, a Mormon, Catholic, whatever it is, he's saying, doesn't it seem like you're wasting your life on a myth? And sometimes when I watch YouTube videos like this, or I read a book, and then I realize that some people have made a career off of something, like maybe it's a discovery that they made. Maybe they discovered something like penicillin or whatever, and then they go and they talk at one research facility or one center where, like, maybe it's hospitals, whatever it is. And they talk about that subject the rest of their life because they conquered something, or somebody that's a marathon runner, and maybe they shattered the Guinness Book of World Records, and they are now considered the fastest marathon runner in the history of man, and they get sponsors and they make a career off of that one win. Isn't that kind of humanity, where you guys are making a career off of slamming Christianity, slamming Catholicism, slamming Muslims all over the world, and you're building a career out of it because you sit around a table like this, which is great. I think the more power to you. And you talk about it, but then you make fun of people, or you say, like, aren't you wasting your time? I would, as a Christian, I could pose the same argument and say, aren't you guys wasting your time sitting around the table drinking, talking about that there is no afterlife. There is nothing in the next world, so why bother? Just eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die. I would say, isn't that kind of wasting your time doing this over and over and over again? What are you trying to accomplish here? So if I have to toss that aside and say no, like, if I say you guys are wasting your time and you force me to toss that aside, then maybe you should toss the idea that you're coming up to people and saying, hey, you're wasting your time with this myth. Stop it. Like, who are you to go up to those people and say that they're wasting their time? That would be my question, if I'm allowed to ask questions. I'm not a part of your circle, but I think you got to kind of have it both ways. If you're going after people's myths, then we should be able to go after you saying, well, I sit around the table and drink all day and I talk about religions and how fictitious they are. So I think it goes both ways.
They should jolly well consider it. Same as we do about our own lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dan Barker's making a collection of clergymen who've lost their faith, but don't dare say so because it's their only living. It's the only thing they know what to do.
I've heard from one of them at least.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to have this when I was younger in arguments with the members of the Communist Party. They sort of knew that it was all up with the Soviet Union. Many of them had suffered a lot and sacrificed a great deal and struggled, manfully to keep what they thought was the great ideal alive. Their mainspring had broken, but they couldn't give it up because it would involve a similar concession.
Right.
But that certainly, if anyone said to me, how could you say that to them about the Soviet Union? Didn't you know you were going to really make them cry and hurt their feelings? I said, don't be ridiculous. Don't be absurd. But it's I find it, in many cases, almost an exactly analogous argument.
When people tell me I'm being rude and vicious and terribly aggressive in a way that I should, I say, if I were saying these things about the pharmaceutical industry or the oil interests, would it be rude? Would it be off limits? No.
Of course it wouldn't.
Right. Well,
another question I would ask is, could they have a gin or a drink or whatever with a Christian, just like this, around the table? So the four horsemen and one Christian. Could they feel comfortable doing that, or would they be judging the Christian by going, this guy, he thinks fantasies all the time, all this kind of stuff, like he's not like us? Would they judge that person? Which is interesting, because I wonder if a Christian were sitting there, if they would be like, we can't even talk on an intellectual level with this guy because he's a Christian. He believes in an invisible God. So that is, to me, that is a fair question. Would these guys give the same platform with a Christian sitting around at the table with them, or would they be like, no, this is only for the four horsemen. Nobody else can sit here with a different opinion? Or could they have someone that is of faith sit down with them, have a drink with them, and shoot the breeze and talk about things like this, of this nature, and go around the table? Would they be comfortable with that, or does it all have to be atheists and a debate all the time? That would be my question.
I want religion to be treated just the way we treat the pharmaceuticals and the oil industry. I'm not against pharmaceutical companies. I'm against some of the things they do, but I just want to put religions on the same page with them.
Including denying them tax exemption.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
and or in the English case, state subsidy.
I'm curious.
So that is a thing that Christopher Hitchens has brought up a lot. He does not like the idea that the church gets tax exemptions and that kind of stuff for helping out society. I guess he might argue and say, well, they don't help. They've actually caused more harm than good, blah, 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 blah. But that is an interesting statement when it goes back hundreds of years, why it was important for the church to obviously have a role in that, where it would be subsidized by the government, by the people in the town, all this kind of stuff, basically saying, if you can take care of this part, we'll help take care of you, because obviously you can't go out and farm if you're taking care of the needs of the people, and somebody's sick and you go and visit them and all this kind of stuff. We'll take care of the land, but you do this part. It's almost like a little makeshift hospital thing. If there's a funeral or something going on, you perform the funeral, you help bury them, you do all this kind of stuff. You sit down and have the hard conversations with people that are like leaving their wife, and you're talking to them saying, maybe you shouldn't leave your wife and you should come back and support your family and all this. You have all those hard conversations. We'll do all this stuff and we'll give you a bit of a subsidy. We'll help you from our income. We'll give you that so that you can do that kind of stuff. That's kind of my understanding is how that works out, because not everybody can be a fireman. So firemen, I should say, get paid by the government. We pay the government to take care of all that stuff so that we get protected at night. If our place burns down, we can call them. We don't have to get charged before the fire department comes. That's just kind of how it works. So it's interesting that Hitchens says that, because then if you're not supporting them, then it's like, well, then they have to go out and do something else because they can't dedicate their time full time to the ministry because they're not being subsidized. My humble opinion, kind of works. It works both ways. If you don't want them to do that, then you go visit the sick people. You go talk to the orphans and help them out. You go talk to the widows. You go perform the services in the funeral homes, all this kind of stuff. You go fight the fires. You go protect the people late at night when somebody calls you because they have a burglary. So it's just kind of interesting. That's his stickler, that doesn't like the idea of church being subsidized.
Is how religion acquired this charmed status that it has compared to any of these other things. I mean, somehow we've all bought into it, whether we're religious or not. And that some historical process has led to this immunization of religion against, well, this hyper offense taking that religion is allowed to take.
And what's particularly amusing to me, finally, at first it infuriated me, but now I'm amused, is they've managed to enlist legions of non-religious people who take offense on their behalf.
And how?
In fact,
yes.
the most vicious reviews of my book have been by people who are not themselves religious, but they're terribly afraid of hurting the feelings of the people that are religious, and they chastise me worse than anybody
Exactly
who's
my
actually
experience.
religious.
Exactly my experience.
And I think so. One of you pointed out how condescending that view is. That
Yes.
It's as though it's like the idea of penitentiaries. I mean, they're other people need them. You know, that
That's
we
right.
must keep
Yes.
these people
Yes.
safely in their midst.
Yes.
Well, I think there's one answer to that question, which may illuminate a difference that or at least a difference that I have with I think maybe all three of you. There's something about. I mean, I still use words like spiritual and mystical without furrowing my brow too much, and I mean, to the consternation of many atheists. I think there is a range of experience that is rare and that is only talked about without obvious qualms in religious discourse, and because it's only talked about in religious discourse, it is just riddled with superstition, and it's used to cash out various metaphysical schemes which it can't reasonably do. But clearly people have extraordinary experiences, whether they have them on LSD or they have them because they were alone in a cave for a year.
So it's interesting that Sam Harris brings this up and starts talking. To me, it's like he's going down a rabbit hole that maybe he doesn't want to go down to say that there are some people that legitimately have a religious experience or a spiritual experience. And maybe he's going to say, who are we to question that? Because if we're questioning that, I think it can cause confusion with the other three horsemen, because it's a slippery slope for them to start talking about spirituality, because then you start defining it. And the more you define spirituality, eventually you're going to get back to God. Because it's kind of interesting that if you're following like the model from Israel, they didn't give the Levites any, or I should say they didn't give, the Levites, I was going to say the descendants of Aaron, but the Levites, the tribe of Levites didn't get any land when they moved into the Canaan territory. They didn't get any land because why? Because they were serving all the other needs that were going on, including taking care of the widows, the orphans, the distressed, all this kind of stuff, the poor, and the maintenance, the managing of money, all kinds of stuff. That was their job. So they sacrificed land to do that, because all 12 tribes couldn't do that. Otherwise, you couldn't protect the borders and all this other stuff, and you couldn't bring in the harvest, all this kind of stuff. Their role was to feed the Levites by bringing their first fruits into the tithe house. I think it was like once every 3 years, everybody's supposed to get together and do that. So this feels like this could be like a universal thing, because other countries do the same thing. They allow churches to be subsidized or write off a percentage of their taxes, all this kind of stuff, in order to help serve the public. So if you take, my question would be is, why is that all over the world in the nations that are, I would say, running successful? It's because they dedicate time to that, to allow for that. So maybe this is where Sam Harris is going. Like, some people do have a religious experience. I think that's a dangerous rabbit hole for Sam Harris to go down in front of the other three horsemen. So I'd be interested to hear what they say.
Or they have them because they just happen to have the neurology that is particularly labile that allows for it. But people have self-transcending experiences, and people have the best day of their life where everything seemed, they seemed at one with nature. Sure. And for that, because religion seems to be the only game in town in talking about those experiences and dignifying them, that's one reason why I think it seems to be taboo to criticize it, because you're talking about the most important moments in people's lives and trashing them, at least from their view.
Well, I don't have to agree with you, Sam, in order to say that it's a very good thing you're saying that sort of thing, because it shows that, as you say, religion is not the only game in town when it comes to being spiritual. It's like it's a good idea to have somebody from the political right who is an atheist, because otherwise there's a confusion of values, which
I like this talk. Sorry, this is actually kind of funny, because I feel they're starting to get uncomfortable with Sam Harris now. And this guy's like, hey, I don't have to agree with you to be sitting here with you, but I think it's always good to have an extreme. Like if you're going to have if you're going to have, I don't know, let's say an all Christian party, it would be nice to toss in an atheist in that party just to keep things honest, if you will. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Why don't you do that then with basically everything? If somebody has got a view that they think it's okay to be, I don't know, a mass murderer or something, do you want that person on your board when it comes to, I don't know, whatever it is in society? I'm kind of wandering off in the woods here, and I want to bring myself back. But it's interesting that if you say that you need a representation from each area. They're not having that representation right now. It's just the Four Horsemen right now. And what could be dangerous about that is if one person shares an opinion outside of that circle, that person might not be invited back to that circle. And that's how people are. This is how humanity is. If we disagree with something, we won't tell you right out of the gate, but we just won't call you back. So I think Sam is going down a little bit of a dangerous rabbit hole. I'd be curious to know what the other two gentlemen say, especially Christopher Hitchens, about spirituality, even if it is on LSD.
Which doesn't help us, and it's much better to have this diversity in other areas. I mean, I think I sort of do agree with you, but even if I didn't, I think it was valuable to have that.
Right.
If one could make one change, and only one, mine would be to distinguish the numinous from the supernatural.
Yes.
Right.
You had a marvelous quotation from Francis Collins, the genome pioneer, who said, while mountaineering one day, he was just overcome by the landscape, and then went down on his knees and accepted Jesus Christ. A complete non sequitur. It's never even been suggested that Jesus Christ created that landscape.
Right. A frozen waterfall in three streams.
Three parts.
Which would be the mind of the Trinity.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We're all triune in one way or another. We're programmed for that. That's very clear. It wouldn't ever have been a four-headed God.
Right.
You know that from experience. But that would be an enormous distinction to make, and I think it would clear up a lot of people's confusion that what we have in our emotions, the surplus value of our personalities, the bits that.
So now Christopher Hitchens wants Sam to redefine what he just said, because he said, some people do have a spiritual experience. And then Hitchens is saying, if you change one little thing about what you said, then I can buy into it a little bit more, which I find fascinating. So you have to say exactly what they want you to say in order for them to listen to you. But it's not the same standard when it comes to listening to Christians, right? Like if we're listening to you, I can't tell you to change what you believe or what you say, tweak it so that I can be like, oh, okay, I understand what you're talking about. You're talking about the Trinity and how we're designed basically like that with those attributes. It's actually kind of interesting that he dove into that and said you won't get a four-headed God or anything like that. So it's interesting that they keep coming back to religion when they're supposed to, it's almost like you can't get away from it. It's interesting. Anyways, I'll let these guys go.
Aren't particularly useful for our evolution, or that we can't prove are, but that do belong to us all the same. Don't belong to the supernatural and are not to be conscripted or annexed by any priesthood.
Yes, it's a sad fact that people, in a sense, won't trust their own valuing of their numinous experiences. They think it isn't really as good as it seems unless it's from God, unless it's in some kind of a proof of religion. No, right. It's just as wonderful as it seems. It's just as important. It is the best moment in your life. And it's the moment when you forget yourself and become better than you ever thought you could be in some way, and see in all humbleness the wonderfulness of nature. That's it, and that's wonderful. But
so it kind of sounds like what you're feeling inside. Let's just say you have a spiritual, a religious experience that you can say anything else, but the one thing you cannot do is you cannot give glory to God. This is what it sounds like they're saying. You can do anything you want in the world, but the one thing that you cannot do is give glory to God. And my question is, why does that stop you? What is blocking you from doing that? So if a guy has a religious experience on that side of the road and he says, oh, I saw God, I felt God, he touched me, now I want to do wonderful things. I feel like at least some of these guys, maybe not Sam Harris, would go up to him and say, look, you can give anybody else credit. You can give the sidewalk credit, that ant over there, that insect credit, but do not give God Almighty credit for how you're feeling right now, is what the vibe that I'm getting. I could be wrong. Feel free to write this timestamp down. and then let me know in the comments and say, Shane, you know, when you said this at this point, you were wrong. Let's continue.
It doesn't add anything to say, golly, that has to have been given to me by somebody even more wonderful.
It's
Well,
been
also-
hijacked, hasn't it? By
Yeah,
the-
But it's also,
Yes.
it's also, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
I think it's a deformity or shortcoming in the human personality, frankly, because the religion keeps stressing how humble it is and how meek it is and how accepting and almost to the point of self-abnegation it is. But actually it makes extraordinarily arrogant claims for these
Right.
moments. It says
Right.
that I suddenly realized that the universe was all about me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And felt terrifically humble about it. Come on, you know,
It's actually the opposite of that. If you give credit to God, you are not saying that the universe is about you. It's about a creator, someone that created you and helped you create your experience. And I think it's actually, humbling to give credit, because the last thing you want is walking around being prideful. So it's interesting that it feels like they're a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that you're giving credit to somebody that you can't see out there. I find that fascinating, interesting. If you don't believe, why should it bother you if someone else gives credit to God? If somebody gives credit to the sidewalk, I'm not going to be like, how dare you? How dare you? I'm just like, okay, whatever. That's what you think. But for some reason, there's taboo words that you cannot say, almost like they're creating their own religion, man's religion, by saying there are some topics that are forbidden. One is you can't say Jesus Christ. Number 2, you cannot give glory to God Almighty. Number 3, you can't think of yourself as a human being and that you have a spiritual aspect to you. Do not say that. So they're almost formulating man's religion in some way, because they have their own rules and regulations that they have to follow, and all 4 of them have to keep in line with each other. Because if Sam Harris starts going down this rabbit trail of maybe we are spiritual, maybe we do think about God every once in a while, I bet you those 3 other horsemen would leave. They'd get up and leave. They call him a traitor. It's kind of interesting. Let's listen.
we can laugh people out of that, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Also,
Yes,
and-
and I think,
and
and I think
indeed
we
must.
should. I am so tired.
So did you catch that? He said we can actually laugh them out of that, make fun of them for believing something, which is interesting, because that's what you call peer pressure. If you don't believe exactly how I believe, you are excommunicated. You must leave. So the very thing that they're saying churches should not do is churches should be more accepting, and maybe they should have an atheist on the board or something, someone that doesn't believe anything that they believe. Meanwhile, they're saying if somebody says something silly like they're spiritual, we should laugh them out of it. Get them to have common sense. We should make fun of them, ostracize them, whatever. So it's interesting.
Of the, if only
I'll
Professor Dennett had the.
I'll back it up.
By
But
the-
it's also, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
I think it's
I'll back it up a bit. That way I don't cut them off.
I think it's a deformity or shortcoming in the human personality, frankly, because the religion keeps stressing how humble it is and how meek it is and how accepting and almost to the point of self-abnegation it is. But actually it makes extraordinarily arrogant claims for these
Right.
moments. It says
Right.
that I suddenly realized that the universe was all about me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And felt terrifically humble about it. Come on, you know, we can laugh people out of that, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Also,
Yes,
And-
and I think,
and
and I think
indeed
we
must.
should. I am so tired of the, if only Professor Dennett had the humility to blah, 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 and
Yes.
humility. And this from people of breathtaking arrogance.
Yeah.
I think,
We shove one aside saying, just don't mind me, I'm on an errand for God.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is a
How
point.
modest is that?
This is the point I think we should return to, this notion of the arrogance of science.
Oh,
because
yeah.
there's no discourse which enforces humility more rigorously. I mean, scientists, in my experience, are the the first people to say they don't know. I mean, if you get a scientist to start talking,
I like that. I think that's healthy. Scientists don't know. I think that's what they should have on their T-shirt. We don't know everything. We don't know how deep the Earth goes. We don't. We've never dug past 7 miles. That's as far as we can go. We can theorize how deep the Earth is. We can theorize how vast the heavens are, but we don't know. We don't know. I think that's a healthy place to be at the very beginning and just say, you know what, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. Here's the theory. I think where a person gets into trouble is they go, well, this is a theory, but we're going to say that's a fact. As a scientist, that gets dangerous after a while. It gets real dangerous. So I'm glad that Sam Harris is at this table. I think it's good to be well-rounded.
off his area of specialization, he or she immediately starts hedging his bet, saying, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, and of course, all the data's not in. I mean, this is
the problem that comes in with a scientist that is wrong is you don't get funded anymore. Kind of like they disagreed with the church being funded or subsidized. Scientists do not get subsidized for being wrong. So they have to build a case where it's plausible that they're closer to being right than closer to being wrong. Otherwise, why are we paying money for this? We're just wasting our money. So there is a bit of a dance that scientists have to do to say that, hey, we're making progress. Otherwise, there's no funding. Like, haven't you watched Spider-Man with Peter Parker and the Green Goblin, where he had to do a test, I forget for whatever formula it was, and the part of the thing was back to formula, and all of a sudden, no more funding by the army. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting.
the mode of discourse in which we are most candid about the scope of our ignorance.
Well, actually, a lot of academics come up with that kind of false modesty. But I do know what you mean.
Yes, it is.
Many's the historian who says, no, I yield. It's just someone.
No, but any academic should do that.
Yes, they should.
The thing about religious people is that they recite the Nicene Creed every week, which says precisely what they believe. There are 3 gods, not one. The Virgin Mary, Jesus died, went to down for 3 days and then came up again.
Yeah.
In precise detail. And yet they have the gall to accuse us of being overconfident and of not knowing what it is to doubt.
And I don't think...
How many times are they bringing up religious ideas? And I get it, like they're talking about how terrible it is, but man, these guys have studied, they know their stuff. And they keep bringing this up as it's foolish for these people to think this way. They're almost hung up on this. It's kind of interesting.
Many of them ever let themselves contemplate the question, which I think scientists ask themselves all the time: what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
What if I'm wrong? I mean,
and I think that's fair. I think the Four Horsemen should be able to have that little pocket. They should have something in their back pocket that says, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong about religion? What if I'm wrong about spirituality? What if there is a God? What if? They're saying it that a true scientist will always have that pocket where they're like, what if I'm wrong? Apply it to your own lives. What if you're wrong about God? I agree with you guys.
it's just not part of their repertoire.
Actually, would you mind if I disagree with you about that? I mean, a lot of the talk that makes religious people hard to, not hard to beat, but hard to argue with, is precisely that they'll say they're in a permanent crisis of faith. There is indeed a prayer, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Graham Greene says the great thing about being a Catholic was that it was a challenge to his unbelief. A lot of people live by keeping 2 sets of books. In fact, it's my impression.
There is that.
It's my impression, in fact, that a majority of the people I know who call themselves believers or people of faith do that all the time. I wouldn't say it was schizophrenia, that would be rude. But
So-
they're quite aware of the implausibility of what they say. They don't act on it when they go to the doctor or when they travel or anything of this kind. But in some sense, they couldn't be without you. But they're quite respectful of the idea of doubt. In fact, they try and build it in when they can.
Well, that's interesting then. And so when they are reciting the creed with its total sort of apparent conviction, is this a kind of mantra which is forcing themselves to overcome doubt by saying, yes, I do believe, I do believe, I do believe, because
Sure,
really
and-
I don't.
And of course, like the others, like the
So that's like the second time that he's brought up the creed. I don't know if that's a Catholic creed or something. I'm not familiar with the creed, and I'm a Christian, so I'm not sure what background he's come out of. And I wish I knew the gentleman that has his head down now, going, man, maybe this isn't going so well. I thought these guys were my friends and would agree with me on everything. But what I do like about the Four Horsemen is that they're able to throw out, can I disagree with you? Or I disagree with you, which I think is great. They're not giving Sam Harris the floor anymore, I notice. But I would like to hear a little bit more about what Sam Harris defines as spirituality, and then hear and see what the other guys do. It's kind of interesting.
secular counterparts.
Body language is everything, I think. Like the guy in the middle with the glasses and the white hair, not the guy on the left, but the guy on the right looks like if you look at body posture, let's just see here.
Build it in when they can.
Well, that's interesting then. And so when they are reciting the creed with its total sort of apparent conviction, is this a kind of mantra which is forcing themselves to overcome doubt by saying, yes, I do believe, I do believe, I do believe, because
Sure,
really
and-
I don't.
and
of course, like the others, like
And he puts his head down. That's kind of interesting. Has his hands folded, puts his head down like, oh man, what am I getting myself into? I don't want to talk about this stuff. The only one that seems comfortable is Sam Harris right now. He's just letting him talk. Kind of interesting.
their secular counterparts, they're glad other people believe it. It's an affirmation they wouldn't want
Yes.
other people not
Yes.
to be making.
Well, also there's this curious bootstrapping move, which I tried to point out in this recent On Faith piece. This idea that you start with the premise that belief without evidence is especially noble. I mean, this is the doctrine of faith. This is the parable of doubting Thomas. And so you start with that, and then you add this notion, which has come to me through various debates, that the fact that people can believe without evidence is itself a subtle form of evidence. I mean, we're kind of wired to, actually Francis Collins, you mentioned, brings this up in his book, where the fact that we have this intuition of God is itself some subtle form of evidence. And this is kind of kindling phenomenon where once you say it's good to start without evidence, the fact that you can is a subtle form of evidence, and then the demand for any more evidence is itself a kind of corruption of the intellect or a temptation or something to be guarded against. And you get a kind of perpetual motion machine of self-deception where you can get this thing up and running.
But they like the idea that it can't be demonstrated, because then there'd be nothing to be faithful about.
Right.
And
That's the point of faith. Yeah.
If everyone had seen the resurrection, and we all knew that we'd been saved by it, so, well, then we would be living in an unalterable system of belief, and it would have to be policed.
Right. Well,
And it would actually be, those of us who don't believe in it are very glad it's not true, because we think it would be horrible. Those who do believe it don't want it to be absolutely proven, so there can't be any doubt about it, because then there's no wrestling.
Hey, so now we're talking about the resurrection. I feel like I'm going to church here this morning. Like, this is great. We're actually sitting around. And I thought for a second, like, oh, these guys are going to they're not talking about anything about God, but God keeps getting brought up. Jesus Christ keeps getting brought up. Now we're talking about the resurrection, which is interesting. Like, you have two sets of people, ones that don't believe, and then ones that do believe that there is a resurrection. And I think there's more people on planet Earth that believe in a resurrection, as in there is something after we die, than not, which is interesting in itself. That could almost be a separate video as to why people believe. You can argue, well, maybe that is something that we have in our DNA that says that, hey, there's something bigger than us. There's someone out there that's bigger than us that we either fight against or that we know. but we just try and, like Sam Harris says, like there's a little tiny, we start off with almost no evidence, but the idea that you're starting off with no evidence almost allows you to have that space to go, okay, I'm going to start piling evidence in here and building on that. Just kind of interesting.
With the conscience, there are no dark nights of the soul.
It was a review of one of our books. I don't remember which, but it was exactly that point. That just what a crass expectation on the part of atheists that there should be total evidence for this. I mean, there'd be much less magic. You know, if everyone was compelled to believe by too much evidence. Actually, this is Francis Collins. I'm sorry. This is
Well,
Francis
a friend of mine, Canon Fenton of Oxford, actually, said that if the church validated the Holy Shroud of Turin, he personally would leave the ranks, because if they were doing things like that, he didn't want any part of it.
Right.
I didn't expect when I started off my book tour to be as lucky as I was. I mean, Jerry Falwell died in my first week on the road. That was amazing.
Yes, that was amazing luck.
I didn't expect Mother Teresa to come out as an atheist.
Yes.
But reading her letters, which I now have, it's rather interesting. She writes, I can't bring myself to believe any of this. She tells all her confessors, all her superiors, I can't hear a voice, I can't feel a presence, even in the Mass, even in the sacraments, no small thing. And they write back to her saying, that's good. Right. That's great. You're suffering. It gives you a share in the crucifixion.
So I would disagree with that, because I have heard people come up to me and say, like, I don't hear the voice of God, so I am struggling. I don't hear his voice out loud. I don't see him physically in this room. I don't see, therefore, is my faith real? I have heard people say that. And the only thing that I can say to combat that, to build that up, if you will, is, where is it? Right here. There's something significant about reading the Bible and being able to hear from God. That should be a video on its own, but I honestly believe the more time you spend in here, the more you can hear him. I'm not saying audibly. I'm saying you can hear him in your thoughts, which is interesting, because as Christians, we get the Holy Spirit as a seal that we are born again, that we are his for all of eternity, and that he can now communicate with us, and he can teach us where to go and what to say and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't spend any time in here, the longer you go away from here, the less life you feel, which is interesting, because it's kind of like the tree of life. When Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, the longer they were away from the tree, the less of a life they lived on earth. And this is what we see happening, is people are living less. You can argue it and say, oh no, we're living way longer. Well, I would argue and say that we don't live as long as Methuselah. We don't live as long as Noah. We don't live as long as some of the patriarchs. So it kind of went down. The farther away that you're from the tree of life, the less time you are here on earth, if that makes sense. So again, back to the Bible, the more you read, the more time you spend in here, the more you hear from God, which is interesting. And it obviously, it has to line up with here. I don't know. It's interesting that they're talking about this.
It makes you part of Calvary. You can't beat an argument like that.
Right.
The less you believe it, the more you're an illustration.
The more
of faith.
you prove it's true.
Yeah.
Yes, and the struggle, the dark night of the soul, is the proof in itself.
Yeah.
So we just have to realize that these really are non-overlapping magisteria. We can't hope to argue with a mentality of this kind.
Well,
There's a difference between belief and understanding. There are probably some things I don't fully grasp in history and in the Bible. I don't understand. I wasn't there. I don't fully understand certain things. There are things in science. Like I don't understand how the ant is able to have a female that can actually go to another colony, blend in so that the males will accept her as a queen and allow for an invasion of another colony to come in because their defenses are down. I don't understand how that works, but I believe that there is a designer. I believe God created that for us to study. But belief, like, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't believe in God. If I didn't believe that Jesus Christ is his son, I wouldn't be thinking about him all day long. Like, who do you want me to talk to? What do you want me to share? How do you want me to do this or that or all of this? I wouldn't be having those conversations internally. I wouldn't be thinking about him 24 hours a day if I didn't believe. I don't believe in Santa Claus. I don't think about Santa Claus all day and all night. Maybe on the 24th, if I'm thinking about what is Santa Claus going to bring me tomorrow, maybe there is a possibility there. Anyways, I probably offended somebody right there. Anyways, let's continue on.
Actually, I
But
disagree there.
we can do just what you're doing now, and that is, we can say, look at this interesting bag of tricks that have evolved. Notice that they're
It was interesting. They all wanted to say something. They almost need a moderator. Let me just back this up. That was actually kind of cool.
Argue with a mentality of this kind.
Well,
but we can do just what you're doing now, and that is.
So now Sam's getting a little bit uncomfortable because it's like this guy didn't let him speak. He's already spoke a lot. He spoke a lot. He spoke a lot. Sam Harris is not getting equal billing time.
We can say, look at this interesting bag of tricks that have evolved. Notice that they're circular, that they're self-sustaining, that they don't have any, that they could be about anything. And then you don't argue with them. You simply point out that these are not valid ways of thinking about anything, because you could use the very same tricks to sustain something which was manifestly fraudulent. And in fact, what fascinates me is that a lot of the tricks they have their counterparts with con artists. They use the very same forms of
I think I'm going to wrap up this video, but if you like this kind of thing, and depending on the feedback and if people watch this video, I may make a part 2, but I'm just kind of tired right now and I want to go out with my wife, go out for a coffee, maybe grab supper or something like that. That's how my attention span goes on this. But there was something I was going to say and it took off. Something, let me just back up what this guy said. Maybe it'll come back to me here.
Because you could use the very same tricks to sustain.
Oh, I know what it was. It would be interesting to see a video from atheists that don't talk about God. That would be an interesting video. I would say, can you go 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, about not talking about Jesus Christ, not talking about God? Man, I can go eons about not talking about the Easter Bunny, maybe once a year. But that's about it. Maybe when I eat Easter eggs. But my point is, for people to be acknowledging that they don't believe in God, they sure spend a lot of time talking about God and rationalizing stuff and why it is we have a triune nature and the resurrection and all this other stuff. It's interesting that this is the conversation that these guys are having on a daily basis, talking about God. And then I feel that is a good place to be. They're talking about it. They're talking about him. People are curious. They'll watch videos like theirs to hear what they're saying. I think that's good to have that kind of discussion. Obviously, I don't know. Have I been disagreeable in this video watching it? I'm a Christian. I don't mind listening to these guys. They're not offending me at all. I I actually find it fascinating, and I'll probably watch more of their videos because it's interesting. I like watching them trying to articulate things, but not going too far, because if they go too far, then one person won't get to speak, which feels like they're not giving Sam Harris. Second, he talked a little bit about spirituality. The three of them are like, no, you can't. We can't go down this rabbit hole. Anyways, let me know your thoughts. If you got a kick out of this, let me know that as well. I'm not sure how much time was left in that video. It's an hour-long video, but I am getting tired. I must admit, I am getting tired. So anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.